Hello, Assalamu alaikum. This is Hisham speaking here from the headquarters of USUM Canada. First of all, I would like to thank USUM Canada very much for organizing this series of lectures on medical humanitarian missions, especially in conflict zones. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Hisham Al-Shair. I am a medical doctor and a biomedical engineer. I earned my medical degree from Istanbul, Turkey, and then my PhD in biomedical engineering from University of Toronto. I've been a scientist with the Toronto Rehabilitation Institute since 2013, and I have been also a chief scientific officer of a startup company called Brazotech until recently. It's a company that manufactures and sells medical devices. So in my presentation today, first of all, I would like to make it interactive, so feel free to interrupt anytime you want and ask your questions. I will be touching on a few points. The first one is the importance of innovation in conflict zones and in medical missions in general. Second, my project in particular that I worked on, including its requirements and the design process that I went through. And then I'll talk about the implementation of my device in Syria and how it helped saving lives. I'll also touch on the role of apps and artificial intelligence briefly, and then the new technical and cutting-edge advances that can be used in medical missions in conflict zones. So starting with the first point, is innovation needed in conflict zones, in medical missions in conflict zones? I say that it's actually very, very much needed and indeed vital. I would claim that it's actually more important in conflict zones and natural disasters and other humanitarian disasters than in normal circumstances. One second. Okay. Why is that? This is because in conflict zones, as in any other disaster, such as a natural disaster, an earthquake or a tsunami and others, we are faced with a non-traditional situation. We're faced with the abnormal situation. It's not the norm. It's something outside of the norm. So if you try to basically mirror what we do in our standard practice to these situations, the outcome will be suboptimal, the least to say, and it might actually fail. And this is going to be obvious from from my own experience, as I'm going to mention in a little while. So this takes me to my story with innovation in medical missions. The project that I worked on dealt with treating large wounds, so wound care in particular, and started in 2014 when I received the call from my best friend, Dr. Anas Al-Qasim, who has been to many missions in Syria during the war. And he said, well, Hisham, you're in the medical devices field and you understand the medical devices. And we are in need of implementing a certain technique called negative pressure therapy to treat large wounds in Syria. Negative pressure therapy. So I asked him, can you explain more? He said, it's a modern technique that uses negative pressure, basically suction, to treat large wounds. And we talk about really large wounds, starting from 10 centimeters in diameter all the way to 30, 40 centimeters in diameter, and even larger. So I started to, I embarked on a process of finding a solution that can be implemented in conflict zones. Now, the current practice for negative pressure is basically using a suction pump. One second. Okay. So the current practice basically is using a large suction pump that's electrically powered and connecting the pump to the wound pad. The suction pump will create a constant minus 100 millimeters of mercury at the wound pad, which will enhance the blood supply to the wound pad and exponentially accelerate the wound healing. Now, the problem with these pumps is that they are very expensive. One pump is about $5,000. which is expected for a medical device. So how can we implement this in the war, in a war zone, in a conflict zone? If we basically just buy a few pumps and spread them in field hospitals, okay, we will treat a few patients every month. But would that satisfy the needs for a place like Syria during the war? Absolutely not, because of the huge influx of casualties. So that takes me to what is the natural process of innovation, creating innovative device for a medical mission in resource-constrained environment. Number one, which is what we do as scientists all the time, is we do a literature search. We look into the literature. We read scientific papers. We look into available solutions, so we don't reinvent the wheel. If there is something that's already available, then why not use it, or maybe modify it? Number two, we look into our requirements. Or maybe, they come actually at the same time, because you look at the literature based on the requirements in mind. What are the requirements for such a device to be implemented in a place like the Syrian war or any other war in the world? Number one, this device should be independent of power supply because of the sparsity of power supply. If you send if you send this device with the patient home, you won't be able to connect it to the wall. Number two, the device has to be low cost and produced in mass quantities, so you can treat a huge number of casualties at the same time. Few devices will not cut it. You need hundreds of devices functioning at the same time. Number three, it should be simple and shouldn't require maintenance, disinfection, shipping back and forth, and things like that, because of the difficult logistics in conflict zones. Indeed, if you look carefully, these are the same requirements. These requirements would apply to many or a lot of the innovations that you need in the conflict zones, especially home-based treatments. If it is an institutional treatment, then that's a different story. I mean, if it is if you need an MRI machine or an ultrasound machine, yes, of course, it has to be complex. It needs to be plugged to the wall. But if you're sending the patient with a device, the device should satisfy the criteria that I just mentioned, which is simplicity, low cost, no electrical power, and so on and so forth. Okay, now that we looked at the literature, what I found is that it was possible to generate negative pressure using off-the-shelf components, medical components. Especially surgeons, they would be familiar with plastic bellows that they connect to the operation site. When they operate on the abdomen or the knee or the shoulder, they connect they would connect a plastic bellow, which is a spring, basically, a self-expanding spring connected with a tube to the surgery site. So I started from that point. I sourced a few of these and measured the negative pressure. I found that the negative pressure varies from minus 30 millimeters of mercury all the way to 200 millimeters of mercury. Looking at literature, I found that the therapeutic pressure is minus 100 millimeters of mercury. Okay, so now I selected the item that gives the exact therapeutic pressure, which is minus 100 millimeters of mercury. There is a range actually between minus 80 and minus 120. All of that is okay. As long as we are in that range, we are good. So this is the component. Now, that component is actually designed for closed wounds, which what happens after surgeries. You have a closed wound, because it cannot regenerate. Once it expands, it cannot regenerate the negative pressure. Whereas with large open wounds, say for example on the chest or the abdomen or the thigh or the trunk, those wounds will continuously leak air and will dissipate the negative pressure in no time. Then comes the next stage, and then with the help of industrial designers, we created a circuit basically that allows continuous sustained negative pressure. Basically, the patient will be able to reactivate the negative pressure device once the negative pressure is dissipated. And this way it became a manual negative pressure pump. So everything is off the shelf, basically medical grade off the shelf components. That was the design, the requirement, the design based on requirement process in a nutshell. Well, this took almost 6 months in total, but it required lots of testing and retesting of different components until we made sure that we have the right design. After we had the right design, now we were at the stage of implementing in Syria. Okay. Then what happened is that we established a workshop in the headquarters of USOM in Turkey, at the border with Syria. It is the same location where they monitor or they handle shipping of medical supplies inside Syria. So it was a perfect location. We established the workshop, trained the technician who started procuring the basic components, assembling the basic components, and testing them to make sure every single device was actually functional. And sure enough, the devices were shipped along with medical supplies into the field hospitals in Syria. Then we come to the next chapter of the story. What happened in the field hospitals? All what we did was basically, the best we can do. But without implementing in the field, we won't know that it actually works or not. What happened is we had early adopters of innovation. Just like with every innovation would have early adopters and somehow late adopters, and very, very late adopters sometimes. Even in conflict zones, even in natural disasters, even in earthquakes, where life-saving is critical, you still have the same pattern. Thankfully, we had a Dr. Mahmoud Al-Hariri who actually spearheaded the implementation of negative pressure devices in Aleppo during the Syrian war, during the bombardment of Aleppo. He started implementing the devices on his patients, and all of a sudden, people started to send messages that they are astonished. We haven't seen anything like this before. The wounds started to develop blood supply, developing granular tissue, what's called granular tissue, which shows healthy blood supply, and healing very quickly. The patients have less pain. They don't have to have dressing every day. Rather, 2 times a week was sufficient. Once people started seeing the results, the astonishing results, they started to ask more. And the ball started rolling. In total, we shipped 300 devices to field hospitals. 200 patients were treated. And the results were astonishing. The results. I'm very, very satisfied and very, very fulfilled with this experience, because it shows that every person, even if you're very remote, like I am here in Canada, very, very, very remote from the place, but even if you're very remote, you are able to innovate and make a contribution towards life savings. I don't want to make this presentation fully and totally about my own experience, because innovation is very wide spectrum. We have, again, welcome to part 2. So again, my name is Hisham Al-Shar. I'm talking about innovation in medical missions in conflict zones and other humanitarian disasters. So the last point I was talking about was the role of artificial intelligence and mobile apps in medical missions. Well, smartphone apps are becoming almost ubiquitous. Almost every single person has a dozen apps at least in his pocket. Every single person is carrying a mobile computer in his pocket in this day and age. Does this have a role in conflict zones? And does this have a role in life saving in general? I would say yes. But partially. How is that? The main function of mobile apps is connectivity. This is one of the main hallmarks of mobile apps, connectivity. And I actually have seen cases where mobile apps were used to connect field hospitals, field doctors with doctors abroad to share x-rays and other radiographs and get opinion on the diagnosis, share images of their cases and ask expert opinion or a second or third opinion about how to handle certain cases. In conflict zones and in wars, trauma is nowhere close to what we see in normal circumstances. So you do need to pool brains together. Mobile apps can help in that. Artificial intelligence. What is artificial intelligence? Well, let's go back to the basics. Artificial intelligence is basically a mathematical tool that learns from past experiences to develop a certain statistical model. And this statistical model is used to give decisions about future decisions. So learning from the past to give decisions about the future. Okay? That's what artificial intelligence is all about. It's basically a mathematical tool. It has shown great advantages in the modern world and the industrialized world. The catch here is that conflict zones, as well as other natural disasters, are not the norm. So the experiences that are generated in those localities are different from what artificial intelligence that we have learned from. Our artificial intelligence in Toronto and in Boston and in London has learned from certain experiences that are different from what is seen in Syria and in Yemen and in Congo. And that's why we have to be quite careful in generalizability of artificial intelligence to conflict zones. Once we take this into consideration, we can gradually develop artificial intelligence models that can help in conflict zones. And actually, I have seen a project that uses artificial intelligence for water sanitation in resource-constrained environments such as Syria and Jordan and Yemen and other places. The last item I'll be talking about is the other technological advances or advancements that can play a role in life-saving in general, in conflict zones and other disasters in particular. The human mind is producing new innovations every day, and thankfully, and we are blessed in North America and in Europe and in other parts of the world that we have access to this innovation. The challenge is how to translate these innovations to conflict zones. Let me give you an example. Still in the wound care area. Nowadays, we have wound dressing that doesn't require gauze at all. It doesn't require gauze. All you need is basically a powder, spray on the wound, and creates a shield, and that becomes your dressing. Okay, it's being used. It's already validated. It's already in use. How to take that into conflict zones? That's another challenge. In Canada, for example, we have groups that have developed. Well, I'm aware of a group that have developed a grasping rehabilitation tool. And by the way, it's not an exoskeleton. It's not an artificial hand. It's basically a tool that rehabilitates paraplegic patients and quadriplegic patients to regain their grasping function. And once they gain their grasping function, it becomes permanent. They might not reach 100%, but oh well, from 0 or from 30% to 70%, this is a huge achievement. These things are available, and they can be used to rehabilitate patients in the subacute and chronic phase after the injury. One last point I would like to mention about innovation, and especially for conflict zones and for humanitarian disasters. Innovation doesn't always mean a breakthrough. It doesn't always mean an invention, something that has not done before. No. Innovation is about being creative in molding the existing tools and equipment to your new situation. This is what innovation in conflict zones is about. As long as we keep this in mind, I think we will be able to find new solutions and help saving lives. So finally, I would like to thank USOM Canada again for this opportunity. I would like to congratulate them for the marvelous work they have been doing, for the support of the negative pressure wound therapy along the way. Your donations will be very much welcome, because these charitable organizations are based on donors like you. You can actually donate by going to the website. I will show you the website link on the webcam here. usom-canada.org/donate_now. And by this, I conclude my presentation, and the floor is open for questions. So we have a question here. Are prosthetic limbs challenging to use in conflict? Yes and no. Yes and no. We do need prosthetic limbs, of course, because the number of amputations is astronomical in conflict zones. That goes without saying. But on the other hand, prosthetic limbs also require some maintenance, require calibration, require adjustment. And that might not be easy to do in conflict zones. So yes, they are needed. But the innovation here, the innovative element, is how to adopt existing prosthetics and existing prosthetic equipment to make it suitable for conflict zones. Yes. So I'll be waiting for any other questions, and happy to receive your questions as well. Okay, if there are no other questions, then thank you very much for listening, and you can as well watch the next episode of the same series. And thank you very much.